Did on purpose. That's the part nobody wants to believe when I tell this story, but it's the truest thing I know about my own mother. She didn't lose track of time. She didn't get confused by the announcements. She didn't panic in a foreign country and forget her 13-year-old daughter at the gate. She looked at her watch, looked at the boarding line, and made a choice. And the choice wasn't me. I was 13 years and 4 months old when she left me at Reykjavik-Keflavik International Airport. I remember the exact age because my brother had made a joke about it the week before we flew out. He said I was finally old enough to be useful, and our mother had laughed in that way. She only laughed when he was the one being funny, like he'd hung the moon and personally invented oxygen. His name was Whitaker. He was 19, and for the entire stretch of my childhood up to that point, he had been the sun my mother orbited around. Let me back up. Our family wasn't poor. My father had owned a small architectural firm in Hartford until a stroke took him when I was 7, and after that, my mother sold the firm and moved us into a smaller house in West Hartford with a maple tree in the front yard. She got a job at a real estate agency. We weren't rich, but we weren't hurting either. The money my dad left was tucked into a trust that would split between Whitaker and me when we each turned 25, or so I thought. I'll come back to that. What I want you to understand first is the kind of household I grew up in. From the outside, it looked like any other suburban Connecticut family. Inside, there were 2 children, a prince, and a problem. I was the problem. My existence was something my mother seemed to manage rather than enjoy. When I brought home a report card with 5 A's and 1 B, she'd ask about the B. When Whitaker brought home a C-, she'd say the teacher was unfair. When I won the regional spelling bee in 5th grade, she forgot to come pick me up and I sat on the curb outside the middle school until the janitor offered to drive me home. When Whitaker got cut from the JV basketball team, she wrote a 3-page letter to the coach. I'm not telling you this to sound bitter. I'm telling you so you understand that what happened in Iceland wasn't a one-time accident. It was the logical endpoint of a 13-year pattern. The trip was supposed to be a graduation present for Whitaker. He'd just finished his freshman year at a state college, and to celebrate, my mother booked a 10-day vacation through Iceland and onward to Copenhagen. I wasn't originally on the itinerary. I found out about the trip the way I found out about most things in our house, by overhearing them on the phone. She was talking to her sister, my Aunt Briar, and laughing about how nice it was going to be to have one-on-one time with her boy. When I asked her about it that night at dinner, she got that pinched look around her mouth. She said, "Fine, you can come, but you'll need to behave yourself," as if I was some difficult animal she had to drag along. Whitaker, sitting across from me, smiled into his mashed potatoes. The thing about Whitaker is that he was charming, not just to her, to everyone. Teachers loved him. Coaches loved him. Random women at grocery stores would pat his cheek and tell him he had a smile like a movie star. And he used it, the charm, like a knife that nobody could see. He could say the cruelest thing in a voice so warm and amused that you'd find yourself laughing along before you realized he was laughing at you. He'd been doing it to me since I was old enough to understand language. He was the one who suggested the layover in Reykjavik. He'd been to Iceland once on a school trip and wanted to show our mother the Blue Lagoon. The plan was fly Boston to Reykjavik, 3 nights at a hotel near the lagoon, then onward to Copenhagen for a week. I was excited despite myself. I'd never been out of the country. I'd never even been on a plane bigger than the puddle jumper that took us to my grandmother's house in Florida. The first 3 days in Iceland were almost good. I say almost because there was always a current running underneath, the way Whitaker would order for me at restaurants without asking what I wanted, the way our mother would forget to translate when the tour guide spoke to her in English and then accuse me of not paying attention, the way the 2 of them would walk ahead of me on every black sand beach until I was practically running to keep up. But I saw the northern lights from the hotel balcony on the 2nd night, and a small, kind elderly man at the front desk gave me a piece of licorice candy that tasted like salt and asphalt, and for a few hours I felt like a person who belonged on a vacation. Then we got to the airport. Our connecting flight to Copenhagen was at 1:15 in the afternoon. We'd checked out of the hotel at 9, taken a shuttle, gotten through security with no problem. We had 3 hours. Whitaker said he was hungry. Our mother said, "Let's find food." I said I needed to use the bathroom first. That's the moment. That's the hinge that my whole life turns on. If I had said, let's eat first, I'd have a different story. But I said the bathroom, and my mother said, fine, give Whitaker your backpack to hold. We'll meet you at the food court near gate 23. I handed him the backpack. My passport was in the front zip pocket. My boarding pass, $300 in birthday money I'd been saving for 2 years to spend on this trip. My phone charger, my headphones, everything except the clothes on my body and a hair tie around my wrist. I went to the bathroom. I took maybe 7 minutes. When I came out, the food court near gate 23 was full of strangers, and my family was nowhere. I walked the whole concourse. I checked the cafe. I checked the burger place. I checked the burger place. I went back to the bathroom thinking maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe they were waiting somewhere I'd already passed. The minutes started to stack up. 20 minutes, 30, 40. The boarding announcement for the Copenhagen flight came over the speakers, and a small, bright panic woke up in my chest. I ran to the gate. The line was already moving. I scanned every face. They weren't in line. I pushed through people, ignoring the dirty looks, and got to the gate agent. I tried to explain. I'm 13. My family. They were supposed to meet me. The gate agent, a woman with a soft Icelandic accent and tired eyes, looked at her screen. She typed. She frowned. She typed again. Then she looked at me with the expression, I will remember until the day I die. Pity, mixed with something darker. Something like dread. She said, sweetheart, your family already boarded. 20 minutes ago? I don't remember screaming. I remember the gate agent walking around her counter and putting a hand on my shoulder. I remember a man in a suit, maybe airport security, asking me to come with him. I remember being walked through a door that said staff only into a hallway that smelled like coffee, and being placed in a small windowless room with a couch and a vending machine and a poster about volcano safety. They asked me for my passport. I didn't have it. They asked me for my mother's name and phone number. I gave them both. Someone in another room began making calls. I sat on the couch and shook so hard my teeth chattered, and a woman from the airline brought me a paper cup of hot chocolate that I couldn't drink because my hands wouldn't hold the cup steady. 40 minutes passed. An older woman who introduced herself as a child welfare officer came in. She had short gray hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain, and she sat on the couch next to me, not too close, and asked me what had happened. I told her everything. The bathroom, the backpack, the passport, the food court that wasn't there. As I talked, I started to understand what I was saying. They didn't lose me. They left me. They had my passport. They had my phone. They had my boarding pass, which had my name on it, which meant the airline knew I hadn't boarded, which meant someone had told the airline it was fine. The welfare officer listened without interrupting. When I finished, she stood up and went out into the hallway, and I could hear her voice through the door, low and tight, the voice of someone who has just understood something ugly. That's when the man came in. I want to describe him carefully because I owe him at least that. He was maybe 60, with silver in his beard and a navy wool coat folded over his arm. His skin was the color of strong tea. He carried a briefcase in his other hand, and when he walked into the small room, he did not look at me with pity. He looked at me like I was a person whose situation was unacceptable. That's the difference. Everyone else had been looking at me like I was a problem to be solved. He looked at me like an injustice had occurred and he was about to fix it. He introduced himself in lightly accented English. His name was Tariq. He was a businessman from Amman, Jordan, traveling on the same Copenhagen connection. He'd been in the lounge 2 doors down and had heard the staff arguing about what to do with an unaccompanied minor whose mother had boarded without her. He said in a perfectly calm voice that he had a daughter my age and that this situation was not going to be resolved by putting me on a later flight. Tariq asked the welfare officer if he could stay with me until things were sorted. He showed her his business card. He asked her to verify his identity. He suggested she contact the U.S. Embassy in Copenhagen immediately, not the airline's customer service line. He suggested she check whether the flight to Copenhagen had actually departed or whether it could be held. He asked her if there was an FBI legal attaché at any nearby American embassy who handled cases involving minors, because what had happened was, and these were his exact words, a federal crime under United States law. The welfare officer's posture changed when he said federal crime. She straightened up. She started taking real notes. I was still shaking on the couch. Tarek sat down in the chair across from me and said very quietly that I was going to be okay. He said that he could not imagine what I was feeling, but that he wanted me to know that what had happened was not my fault, was not because I had done anything wrong, and was not going to be the end of my story. He said it the way my own father might have said it, if my father were still alive. I started crying then. I cried for about half an hour. Tarek did not say anything during that half hour. He just sat there. At one point, he handed me a clean white handkerchief from his coat pocket, and I used it. When I finally looked up, he asked me one question. He asked if I was hungry. I said yes. He had the welfare officer order food. He paid for it. A grilled cheese sandwich and an apple and a hot chocolate that, this time, I was able to drink. While I ate, things began happening fast. The Copenhagen flight had landed by then. Icelandic authorities had contacted Danish authorities. Danish authorities had pulled my mother and brother off the jet bridge before they could leave the airport. They were being held in a customs office in Copenhagen, and someone was trying to reach the U.S. Embassy. The welfare officer kept stepping out and coming back with new information, and each time, Tarek would translate for me what was actually happening underneath the official language. Around 4 in the afternoon, the welfare officer came in with the phone. She said, "Your mother would like to speak to you." Tarek looked at me. He didn't tell me what to do. He just looked at me like, "This is your decision." I took the phone. My mother's voice was the strangest thing. She was crying. I had not heard her cry since my father's funeral. She said, "Baby, oh my God, baby. I am so sorry, there has been a horrible mistake. Your brother told me you had run off to find an earlier flight. He said you'd called him from the gate. I never would have boarded if I had known." I let her talk. I let her cry. I let her say her brother's name 3 or 4 times in that broken voice, and then I asked her one question. I asked, "Where is my passport?" There was a silence. A long one. She said, "It's in your brother's bag." I said, "Why is it in his bag?" She said, "Because you gave him your backpack to hold." I said, "I gave him my backpack 20 minutes before boarding. I was in the bathroom for 7 minutes. There was no time for me to call him from any gate. There was no time for me to run off to any earlier flight. The only way you could have boarded that plane is if you knew I wasn't coming." She started crying harder. She said, "Please don't say that." She said, "Please, this is a misunderstanding." She said, your brother is going through a hard time right now. He's been jealous of how much I love you both. You don't understand the pressure." I said, "He's been jealous of how much you love us both?" She said, "Yes, baby. He just gets confused sometimes about how much I love you." And in that one sentence, in that one impossible delusional sentence, my mother told me everything I had spent 13 years suspecting and never being able to prove. That whatever had happened in the airport, she was already deciding to bend her version of reality around my brother. She was already at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon in a Danish customs office, building him an alibi. I handed the phone back to the welfare officer. I said I didn't want to talk to her anymore. The welfare officer looked at me, and then she looked at Tarek, and then she said into the phone, in a voice as cold as the North Sea, "Ma'am, I am ending this call. Officials will be in contact. Please cooperate fully with Danish authorities and the United States Embassy." She hung up. What happened over the next 4 hours is something I still have a hard time piecing together because I was 13 and exhausted and emotionally taken apart. But I remember the basic shape. A woman from the U.S. Embassy in Reykjavik came to the airport. Her name was something like Pemberton or Pendergrass. I genuinely cannot remember. And she wore a maroon scarf and brought paperwork and a temporary travel document, and the kind of grim efficiency that I appreciated. She interviewed me on the record. She had me describe everything that had happened. She had me describe my brother's behavior toward me over the years. She asked about the joke he had made the week before we flew out, about me being old enough to be useful. She wrote everything down. Tarek stayed for all of it. He didn't insert himself, but he didn't leave either. When the embassy woman tried to send him home, he politely declined. He said he would wait until I was placed somewhere safe. He said he had already missed his connection and there would be other flights. That's the part I want you to understand. He missed his own connection. He had business meetings in Copenhagen the next morning that he later told me cost him a contract worth a substantial amount of money. He stayed. He sat in that windowless room with a stranger's child for almost 6 hours because he had decided that this was what a decent person did. By 8 o'clock that evening, the situation in Copenhagen had escalated significantly. Danish customs had searched my brother's carry-on. They had found my passport. They had also found, in a side pocket, a folded piece of hotel stationery on which my brother had written, in his lazy, lubing handwriting, the boarding time of an earlier flight to Copenhagen, with my name and seat number scrawled next to it, as if to corroborate his story to our mother, as if to give her something to hold up if anyone asked. That note was what turned the whole thing from an alleged misunderstanding into a documented case of premeditated child abandonment. He'd written down the lie before he told it. He planned the alibi. Both of them were arrested. My mother was charged in Denmark with negligent abandonment of a minor in a foreign jurisdiction, which carries serious consequences under their family law. My brother was charged with the same, plus a separate charge related to the falsified document. They spent that night in custody. The U.S. Embassy was looped in. Because the abandonment had originated from a U.S. carrier flight involving a U.S. minor, the FBI's legal attaché in Copenhagen opened a parallel investigation. I learned all of this later. That night, I was placed temporarily in the care of the Icelandic child welfare system. Tarek had to go. Before he left, he gave me his business card and said, "When you are home in America, you can call me. If you ever need anything, you can call me." He said this in the same tone he had used all afternoon, like he was stating a fact about the world rather than making a promise. I did not see him again for almost a year. I flew home to Connecticut 3 days later, accompanied by an embassy escort. My Aunt Briar picked me up at JFK. She was the sister I'd overheard my mother laughing with about the trip, and on the drive home she could not stop apologizing, even though she had done nothing wrong. She kept saying, "I knew something was off. I knew. I should have called you." My mother and brother did not come home for a long time. Denmark took the case seriously. My mother eventually pleaded out and received a suspended sentence, a substantial fine, and a mandatory psychological evaluation. She was banned from the Schengen area for 10 years. My brother, who was 19 and therefore a legal adult, did not get off as easy. The falsified note was bad for him. He served 4 months in a Danish detention facility and then, upon his return to the United States, faced a separate federal investigation. The FBI, working with the embassy's findings, charged him under a federal statute related to international child abandonment. He pleaded guilty to a reduced charge and served 18 months in a federal facility in Pennsylvania. While they were gone, I lived with Aunt Briar. Aunt Briar was 4 years younger than my mother and had spent most of her adult life in my mother's shadow, the way I had spent my childhood in Whitaker's. We recognized each other, I think. We recognized the shape of being the one nobody quite saw. She had a guest bedroom in a townhouse in New Haven, and she let me paint the walls whatever color I wanted. I picked a soft green, the color of the inside of a maple leaf. She enrolled me in a new school. She came to my parent-teacher conferences. When I won the 8th grade essay contest, she was in the front row crying. I want to tell you something about Aunt Briar that took me years to understand. She did not save me. The Icelandic welfare officer didn't save me either. The Icelandic welfare officer didn't save me either. The embassy woman didn't save me. Tarek didn't save me. What they did was harder than saving. They treated me like a person, a whole person. Every single one of them, in the worst week of my life, looked at me and saw someone who deserved care, attention, time. Not a problem. Not an inconvenience. Not a kid who was probably being dramatic. A person. Saving people is what stories about heroes do. Real life is just a series of strangers and almost strangers deciding, in small moments, to act with decency. My mother had 13 years of those small moments and chose differently almost every time. These people had hours, and they chose better. The trust fund my father left was the other thing. I mentioned earlier I'd come back to it. When my father died, the money had been put in my mother's name as trustee for my brother and me. The understanding was that it would be split between us when we each turned 25. What I learned during the legal proceedings, because the embassy investigation pulled financial records, was that my mother had been quietly drawing from my half of the trust for years. She had not touched my brother's half. She had used my half to pay for his car, his college tuition, his summer programs, his new wardrobe each fall. She had drained almost 40% of what was supposed to be mine. By the time I was 18, with a court-appointed financial guardian helping me sort through the accounts, what was left was a fraction of what my father had wanted me to have. I sued her. I was 19. I won. The settlement included a clawback against her own assets and a formal acknowledgement in writing that she had violated her fiduciary duty as my trustee. The judge in the case, a woman in her 60s with iron gray hair and a flat affect, looked at my mother across the courtroom and said one sentence I will never forget. She said, "Ma'am, you treated your daughter as a resource. That ends today. I have not seen my mother in person since that hearing. She has called. She has written letters. She has twice sent flowers on my birthday. I do not respond. Some people will tell you that forgiveness is necessary for healing, that holding on to anger is the same as drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die. I respect those people. I just don't agree with them. What I have done is something different. I have set her down. She is not a weight I carry anymore. She is a fact in my history. I do not love her. I do not hate her. I simply do not allow her access to my life. My brother, after his release, tried for a few years to reestablish contact. He went to therapy. He sent long apologetic emails. He claimed transformation. I read the emails. I did not respond. About 4 years ago, the emails stopped. I heard through a cousin that he got married, that he has a child, that he works at an insurance company in Ohio. I wish him a quiet life. I do not wish him a place in mine. Tarek and I stayed in touch. I want to end with this, because if you're going to remember one thing about my story, I wanted to be him. The summer after I started high school, almost a year after the airport, my Aunt Briar helped me write him a letter. We mailed it to the Amman address on his business card. 2 weeks later, I got an email back. He wrote that he had thought about me often. He wrote that his daughter was a year younger than I was, and that she had asked, when he came home late from that Copenhagen trip, why he had stayed with the American girl. He wrote that he had told his daughter, because no child should ever sit alone in a room and believe she does not matter. He said he thought I might want to know that. We wrote letters for years. When I went to college on a partial scholarship that my Aunt Briar and I scraped together with what was left of my trust, Tarek sent me a leather-bound notebook with my name embossed on the cover. When I graduated, he flew to Connecticut for my ceremony. I had not seen him since I was 13. He looked exactly the same, only with a little more silver in the beard. We had dinner with my Aunt Briar at a small Italian place in New Haven, and she cried into her wine, and Tarek told her, very seriously, that she had raised a young woman her late brother would have been proud of. I am 31 now. I work as a public defender in Hartford, specializing in cases involving minors. I have a small apartment with a window box of basil that I almost never remember to water. I am not married. I have a partner I love deeply, a paramedic named after a city in Wales who knows the whole story and keeps it gently, like something fragile he would never break. The lesson, if you want one, is small and quiet. The people who are supposed to love you sometimes don't. The blood in your veins is not a contract. A mother is not, by definition, a safe person, and a brother is not, by definition, a friend. Family is a word that gets used to mean two different things, and the people who use it to trap you are usually the ones who don't deserve to claim it. But there is the other kind of family, the kind you build out of the strangers who saw you when no one else did, the customs officer with the beaded chain on her glasses, the embassy woman in the maroon scarf, the aunt who painted the guest bedroom green, the Jordanian businessman who missed his meeting, the judge who said, "That ends today." If you are someone's invisible child right now, listening to this, I want to tell you the thing that took me almost 20 years to learn. You are not invisible. You are being unseen. Those are different. The first is a fact about you. The second is a choice the people around you are making. And a choice, unlike a fact, can be left behind. You can walk out of the room. You can build the family that sees you. And one day, on a quiet Tuesday morning in a city far from the one where you grew up, you can wake up next to someone who knows your whole story, and you can water the basil, and you can think, without any pain at all, about the small, bright girl you used to be. Sitting on a couch in a windowless room in Iceland, drinking a hot chocolate a stranger paid for, beginning, without yet knowing it, the long, slow work of saving herself. That girl is fine now. Tell the one in your life that she will be too. I think about that small windowless room more often than you'd expect, not because of the fear, though there was plenty of it, but because of what it taught me about cause and effect. My mother did not wake up one morning and decide to abandon her 13-year-old daughter in a foreign country. She made thousands of small choices over 13 years that pointed in that direction, and that day at the airport was simply the place where all those choices arrived. Whitaker did not become cruel overnight. He became cruel because every cruelty was rewarded, every kindness toward me was punished as weakness, and every lie he told was treated as gospel. Behavior that gets fed grows. Behavior that gets starved dies. That is the simplest law I know. What saved me was not luck. I want to be careful about that, because people love to call these stories miracles. Tarek did not appear because the universe decided I deserved a rescue. He appeared because he had spent a lifetime building himself into the kind of man who, when he hears a child being mistreated 2 doors down, gets up. The customs officer with the beaded chain, the embassy woman in the maroon scarf, my Aunt Briar painting a guest bedroom green. None of them were magic. They were people who had done the long, quiet work of becoming decent, and when the moment came, the decency was already there, ready to be spent. That is what I want any young person hearing this to understand. Character is not something you summon in a crisis. It is something you build in the boring days, in the small choices nobody is watching, so that when the crisis arrives, you already know who you are. I was 13 and shaking on a couch and had nothing in the world except the clothes on my body. And what I learned in that room was that I would have to build myself the same way Tarek had built himself, one ordinary day at a time. So I did. I read every book my Aunt Briar put in front of me. I went to therapy for 6 years. I learned the law because the law was the thing that had finally drawn a line my mother could not cross. I picked a profession where I could stand between a child and the adults who failed her, because that was the role someone had played for me, and the debt felt like something I wanted to keep paying forward. If you grew up being told you were the problem, please hear me. The voice in your head that tells you that you are too much, or not enough, or somehow responsible for the cruelty of people who were supposed to love you, that voice is not telling the truth. It is an echo. You can outlive an echo. You can fill the room with new voices, the voices of strangers who saw you and aunts who chose you and quiet partners who keep your story safe. You can become the one who, when the next frightened child is sitting on a couch somewhere, gets up and walks toward her. That is how the chain breaks. Not in courtrooms, though sometimes in courtrooms. Not in apologies, though apologies sometimes help. It breaks in the ordinary act of becoming, day by day, the person nobody became for you.